Hi, I'd like to offer some of my reflections about picking apart PC. It's more and more coming to my understanding that, um, in a similar way that public discussions around race often get bogged down to racism and pointing out a racist, um, PC culture has really silenced the ability of many white people to speak about race. So the only way that people know to speak about race is through the rhetoric of racism. And of course, we all know that today um, there's more willingness to discuss the complexities of race and not just racism. And so we really do have to pick apart PC. And I think that this Texas shooting, from what I'm hearing in various facets of the media, is that there are people around this man in Texas at Fort Hood who had some ideas that there was something going very wrong with this individual's emotional stability, let alone ability to lead. And there was a deep failure in leadership because people were silenced. Leaders, comrades, colleagues, subordinates, people who were even over him felt silenced around this issue of what was disturbing their colleagues so greatly because there was no way to talk about race. And they knew that race and ethnic difference were tied to perhaps the tensions that he felt in serving A, in a conflict, B, as a soldier in war, so committed to violence in the day and age where we talk about nonviolence and we have the commander-in-chief who has a prize for peace. Indeed, to be fighting a conflict against your own people. And by against your own people, I mean the fellowship of Muslims, fellowship of Islam. And I think we really do have to pick apart PC because there are some things very fundamental to looking at the other that can really help us to pick apart PC, to help us in America become more comfortable in popular discourse and talking about race. Because it can't just stick to oh my God, there could be something that there could be a way that race informs X situation, and so we have to find who is racist. It's not that simple. But I'll give you some examples of what I mean from my perspective. So I'm gonna talk about whiteness as one sort of race, and I'm gonna talk about how PC has silenced a lot of the dialogue around it. So in one report where they were talking about this discussion, it was a group of white people, reporters, and it was really interesting. It's a show that I like a lot. And I was wondering if they were going to talk about how race and class inform their own perspective. And PC doesn't allow that because PC doesn't allow for them to say, so they were talking about, so this was an act of terrorism, and the guy wanted to say, well, this is an act of terrorism because it is not that terrorism is defined by that mass terrorism and Al-Qaeda style terrorism, and he wasn't even implying that this shooter was related to Al-Qaeda, but he was saying that what terrorism does, he terrorized this community, and to prove that, he gave the analogy of the DC marksman, assassin who was assassinated or killed by the state, or however you want to put it, murdered by the state last week. So this man, so these are forms of terrorism. And it's interesting because, of course, we also have the quintessential form of American terrorism, the Ku Klux Klan, and that was white terrorism against black people, and it's classic terrorism because it's meant to terrorize. So it's not that lynching is just meant to kill that nigga. It's that lynching is meant to let all the nigga babies and the nigga children and the nigga women's and the nigga men's and the other niggas to know that they better stay in their place. It's terrorism. And that's what 9/11 did. It terrorized us and said, "All right, we're gonna draw arms." I mean, it put us in our place, and we went there. And that's when we have to look at, well, how does I mean, race is there. What are the complexities of what race and class do to us? How we see the world. And when I hear a group of white, you know, people talking about, well, we know what this is, and then these other people who are different from us in our way of life. This is the coded language of whiteness. And I think from my vantage point, this is the part of PC that I want to uncloak. And it isn't to say that these white people are racist, but it is to say that maybe we need to think about the ways that we position ourselves um, as Americans, as Christian, as having, I'm like, what is it that we have to compromise in order for us to say it's us against them, it's us against the terrorist? Like, what do we have to deny? That's where the thick of PC comes in, is can we have honest conversations? And I think what makes people uncomfortable in these public discourses is that we haven't had honest conversations. We talk about a President Obama. I mean, just look at all the things around President Obama. And this is the next example that I want to give of where we need to uncloak PC. So people talk about his visit to the returned soldiers, the bodies of the returned soldiers, and how, oh, it's weighing in. And this is what I say, this is what makes us a death-worshipping culture. We say now we see him as a commander-in-chief because he's gone and he's worshipped death. He went on Veterans Day and he went and saw the soldiers, and I was like, okay. Now we can take him seriously because he's standing up. So I'm like, he wasn't standing up when he's talking about healthcare and keeping people alive and healthy and having a good quality of life and a long life at the same time. That's not a commander-in-chief. No, they need to see somebody who's going to go for war. And so that's what people are so uncomfortable with him in the Nobel Peace Prize, because we worship death. We worship Jesus's crucifixion, and not the way that Jesus lived, and not the lessons that he taught through the way he lived. That's the death worship culture. And that's where I see we are as our leadership. We only see leadership as sacrificial leadership. Those who sacrifice themselves, those who are like Captain Kirk, who are willing to go on the edge, like go against the entire UN and the world community and build your own little coalition of willing, own little federation. The a kingdom of Nauru, stuff like that. Little federation type. The Star Trek type, the cowboy leadership that we have in America. That's the death worship culture. We're willing to go to any end by any means necessary and kill whoever we need to, because we're just benevolently out here exploring. Look at Star Trek. Look at the original series, The Cloud Miners. Classic example of that Bush cowboy style leadership. And that's the death worship culture. And I think that's what whiteness has become. You have to forget. Even in that episode of Star Trek, she talks about it. You have to forget. Just forget it. You hear all this talk about forget slavery. Well, no, that means you want to forget lynching as a form of terrorism. And you want us to forget Jim and Jane Crow. That's what we have to forget. That's what we have to sort of compromise in order to sustain this oneness of America. We have to deny that Christianity has been used to justify oppression in different eras, and that we interpret it differently now, the same scripture, and choose not to see, the story of Ham to justify, black servitude, for example, and white superiority, white supremacy. So now we have to use different examples to justify it, or not, unless we're able to unpack it. And to do this, we have to unpack those old ways. We can't have those old conversations because they really got us nowhere, except for divided and therefore conquered. So I challenge people to forget PC. It's not about being PC. It's about being honest with your feelings, where you're coming from. So I'm willing to say this is where we were, but it doesn't have to be where we're going. And when I hear the criticisms of Obama, I see that there's a fundamental problem with him. All that stuff, that was for y'all to see. All the dead soldiers, should we show the dead soldiers on the news? No, Obama said, yeah, you should see them in there. If seeing them takes me going there, then I'll do the publicity stunt. That's where he's for. That's his leadership. That's life worship.